Hello and welcome back to the Rational Farid. Today, we're not just discussing history, we're talking about one of the most pervasive ideas in human civilization, a concept that underpins politics, war, and the lives of billions. It's a foundational belief that, when we peel back the layers, reveals a profound truth about where we, as a species, are getting things wrong. I'm talking about the Jesus fallacy. For those of you who are new, I'm Farid, and on this channel, we believe in asking the tough questions and demanding evidence that can be verified and repeated. Because frankly, the state of our planet demands that we all become more responsible humans. And too often, religious belief, as noble as it may seem, can cause huge problems by letting people fall back on faith instead of taking personal responsibility for the world we live in. We're not here to invalidate anyone's personal faith, but to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Today, we're going to be talking about an uncomfortable truth, an idea that when you explore it, you'll discover the shocking reality of how so much of what we hold as true is a mishmash of borrowed ideas and fantastical claims. Are you ready? Let's begin. All right. Before we can deconstruct something, we need to understand exactly what we're deconstructing. So let's lay out the fundamental Christian dogma. At its very core, fundamental Christianity teaches that all human beings are born into a state called sin. This isn't just a lapse in judgment or a mistake, like the older Jewish concept of het. It's a negative quality, a kind of black mark against us that we, as humans, apparently can't remove on our own. We're inherently flawed, deserving of divine punishment. So what's the solution to this seemingly inescapable problem? The core belief is that the deity, wanting us to have eternal life, paid the ultimate price for this affliction by incarnating as a perfect human being. This individual lived the perfect life, sinless, and then was executed, a sacrifice meant to pay the blood debt for all of humanity's sin. The promise is this: if you believe in this specific act and accept the sacrifice, you will have eternal life. Simple, right? A problem and a divinely provided solution. Now that we have the claims on the table, we can begin to apply some critical thinking. So, how do we begin to approach such grand claims? With the same tool we use to understand everything else in the universe: rational thought. The scientific method is our gold standard for a reason. It's objective, unbiased, and it relies on evidence that anyone, anywhere can verify. It's a humble and cautious endeavor that never claims to have all the answers. Instead, it offers a path to truth, one repeatable experiment at a time. And this leads us to the most important rule of all: the burden of proof. If anyone makes a claim, especially an extraordinary one, the onus is on that person to provide the irrefutable evidence. You don't just get to say God exists or Jesus walked on water and then expect everyone else to waste their time disproving your claim. That's not how reality works. That's not how we built planes that fly or phones that work. Now, think about this for a second. Imagine every book, every piece of technology, all our scientific knowledge, and yes, all of our religious texts disappeared today, vanished. Within a few hundred years, religions would start to reemerge, but they would be different. They would have new names, new stories, and new moral codes. But when science eventually reemerged, it would be identical to what we have today. The laws of physics, the structure of DNA, the principles of chemistry, they would all be rediscovered exactly as they are. That, my friends, is arguably the single most obvious proof that science is not based on whim or emotional interpretation. Something is either correct or it's not, based on the evidence. Faith, on the other hand, changes with the wind. So let's take our rational lens and turn it toward the central figure of this religion, Jesus. A lot of people believe the Gospels are factual historical accounts, but that's a mistake. We have to remember that ancient historians were not like modern ones. They weren't trying to deliver objective truth. They were often trying to convince you of a particular point of view, using rhetoric to enforce their narrative's validity. Authors like Luke would even use the guise of being a historian to make their stories sound more credible. And for modern historians, trying to reconstruct a gone past is incredibly difficult. All we have are marks on stone, words on paper, the remnants. We can't go back and verify the claims. This is where the so-called historical Jesus project comes in. Many well-meaning, sober-minded individuals have tried to separate the fantastical, mythical claims from a real flesh and blood individual. But for me, the problem is simple. We have absolutely no reliable information about that hypothetical person or persons. All we have is the myth, the stories, the folk tales, the exaggerated, fantastical accounts. The Jesus described in the Gospels is a construct, an idea built from a mishmash of ancient thoughts and beliefs. And here's a crucial point: the fallacy of conflation. Even if we could prove a historical Jesus existed, it wouldn't validate the entire belief system that evolved from his myths. It's like saying, if I prove the ancient Greek philosopher Thales lived in the 6th century BCE, then his idea that earthquakes are caused by the earth floating on water must also be true. That's nonsense. Proving the person doesn't prove the claim. And speaking of fantastical claims, have you ever heard of Apollonius of Tyana? He was a Greek philosopher who lived around the same time as the mythical Jesus. Get this, he was a wandering divine man, ate only dried fruits, walked barefoot, wore a linen robe, briefly took a vow of silence, debated priests, had 7 disciples, was acknowledged as divine, claimed immortality, prophesied, exorcised demons, healed the lame and blind, and even resurrected the dead. Sound familiar? Celsus, an early critic of Christianity, even pointed out that Apollonius had similar divine claims, asking why Christians believe theirs but not his. It just goes to show you, divine men with extraordinary claims were a dime a dozen in the ancient world. All right, let's smash some myths right away, because the conservative view of Jewish origins with Adam and Eve, a 6,000-year-old earth, and a literal exodus is completely out of step with archaeological and historical fact. For example, the idea of an exodus where Moses led people out of Egypt around 1500 to 1200 BCE is contradicted by the fact that Thutmose III, the pharaoh of that era, owned all the land of Canaan. A literal exodus would have meant Moses was leading people into Egypt, not out. Not to mention the Canaanites, who predate any Israelites, had been living under Egyptian control for centuries. And forget monotheism for a minute. Early Canaanite culture from which Israelites emerged was decidedly polytheistic. Their main deity was El, with Asherah, a goddess of creation, as her consort. And Yahweh? He was originally a very minor deity, possibly linked to metallurgy from the Sinai region. We have actual evidence for this. Archaeologists discovered bronze serpents in Timna Valley dating back to 1350 to 1250 BCE, which line up perfectly with the biblical Moses snake story. It's a clear vestige of this older metallurgy-focused Yahweh worship. But here's the kicker. The Kuntalit Aldred inscriptions, dating to 800 BCE, explicitly invoke Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah, even mentioning a covenant with her. This directly contradicts the idea of early Jewish monotheism and proves Yahweh and Asherah were worshipped as a couple. It wasn't until much later, probably around the reign of King Josiah in the 7th century BCE, that Asherah's cult objects were supposedly destroyed and completely phased out, pushing the idea of Yahweh alone. This slow move toward worshiping only one deity, a process called monolatry, was heavily influenced by foreign powers. When the Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian empires conquered the region, they deported the people and introduced Aramaic as the lingua franca, completely challenging the idea that Hebrew was some original divine language. But for a crucial piece of the puzzle for understanding Christianity, we need to look to the Persian Zoroastrianism, specifically a branch called Zurvanism. The Persians, who conquered the Babylonians, were Zoroastrians. They believed in a benevolent deity, Ahura Mazda, and his evil twin, Angra Mainyu, equal in power, both created by infinite time. The old polytheistic deities became Yazatas, or what we'd call angels and demons. This dualism, this idea of good and evil forces, directly influenced nascent Judaism. This is where concepts like purity laws and the idea of Yahweh being worshipped alone as an international deity come from. It's an incredible link showing how Judaism proper, coalescing around 500 to 400 BCE with the redaction of the Torah, was significantly shaped by Zoroastrian ideas. Finally, by the 3rd century BCE, under constant foreign oppression, Jewish theology started shifting again. They were tired of thinking Yahweh was always punishing them for their iniquity. New ideas crept in: the last days, apocalyptic events, and the end of time. The Dead Sea Scrolls from groups like the Essenes reveal radical new concepts. They claimed Yahweh created 2 spirits, one evil and one good, afflicting human beings. This is the first time we see an attempt to personify evil in Judaism, a clear departure from normative Judaism. This directly paves the way for the Christian devil. As you can see, what we know as Judaism was a constantly evolving religion, influenced by many different cultures and beliefs. This wasn't some divinely ordained, unchanging faith. It was a human construct, and this in turn is the very foundation for what would become Christianity. All right, we've established that what we know as Judaism was a constantly evolving set of beliefs. Now let's talk about the incredible leap to Christianity and how it was not solely influenced by Judaism. In many ways, normative Judaism and normative Christianity are actually antithetical to each other. If you take the Adam and Eve story literally, as fundamentalist Christians do, then you're left with a glaring contradiction: an omniscient God who somehow didn't realize Adam and Eve would disobey him, then punishes all humanity for it. It's like a potter making a terrible ashtray and then punishing the ashtray for his own bad craftsmanship. This inherent contradiction paves the way for more complex, often contradictory theological solutions. And these solutions didn't come out of a vacuum. They came from the real heavyweights of influence, Plato and Plotinus. Plato's allegory of the cave is a mind-blowing concept that lays the groundwork for so much of this. Imagine us, trapped in a cave only seeing shadow images on the wall, thinking that's reality. But outside, there's a world of true forms, like the perfect circle. You've never seen a perfect circle, right? If you draw one, it's just carbon on paper, irregular under a microscope. Yet we all know what a perfect circle is. That concept, Plato argued, exists in a superior divine realm. Our world is just a pale reflection, a place of fallenness. Doesn't that sound familiar to Christian ideas of a fallen world? Building on Plato, we get Plotinus and Neoplatonism, a direct influence on early Christianity. Plotinus conceived of the One, or the Source, a monad that's perfect, self-sufficient, and beyond human comprehension. Sound like a certain deity? He also introduced the concept of hypostasis, the merging of the divine and material. This very word was later used by early Christians to explain the mystery of the Godhead. You see the borrowing, folks? And then there's Gnosticism, a massive, fascinating influence. Gnostics believed in a realm of evil, the demiurge, connected directly to the material world and ruled by malevolent beings called archons. And above this was the perfect pleroma, a realm of light with emanations from the One, including Christ and wisdom. Here's the radical idea. Some Gnostics even believed that Yahweh was the supreme embodiment of evil because he created matter. For them, Christ wasn't a person, but an emanation, an intercessor who brings spiritual knowledge to allow humans to move from the darkness of the material world to the realm of light. This is why early Christianity wasn't just one thing. We had many sects with wildly different beliefs. We had the adoptionists, who thought God just adopted a human male named Jesus. We had the Arians, who saw Christ as God's first creation and thus subservient to the Father. And we had the Docetists, who, influenced by Gnosticism, believed Jesus couldn't be truly human because matter was sinful. So he was a phantom. This was a major debate, only settled by the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, which declared Arianism a heresy and paved the way for the literalist Christian triumph and the invention of the Trinity, a complex theological construct not found anywhere in the Bible. Now you have to remember that early on, the church fathers weren't dealing with centuries of established tradition. They were a fledgling movement under immense pressure to prove their claims. They assumed the New Testament was factual history. But when external critics like Celsus started pointing out that their divine man, Jesus, was suspiciously similar to other divine men like Apollonius of Tyana, they needed more. They needed extra biblical evidence to back up the myths. The problem? They quickly found there was nothing. No objective accounts, no independent confirmation. So, what did they do? If you think they abandoned their beliefs, you're missing a fundamental part of the human element. They thought, we know this is the truth. Souls need saving. So what's a little pious fraud to help things along? In fact, Eusebius, a famous church father, basically admitted to this. The extent of this making it up is hilarious if it weren't for so serious. We're talking fake letters supposedly from Pontius Pilate, or fantastical embellishments like descriptions of Judas so absurd you'd cry with laughter, such as his genitalia swelling so much he couldn't get through a doorway. And let's not forget the interpolations in historical writings like Josephus's Antiquities to make it seem like he confirmed Jesus. This wasn't about history, it was about narrative control. But perhaps the most chilling example comes from St. Augustine, a doctor of the Catholic Church. This man, whose doctrine shaped the very core of Christianity, argued that Jesus' hissy fit in the temple, when he whipped moneylenders, gave Christians the moral authority and divine mandate to take drastic measures against anyone they believed was a heretic or non-Christian. This justified violence and oppression against different Christian sects, and especially against Jews. And the idea that the Roman Emperor Constantine rescued and promoted Christianity because he believed? A lie! Constantine was a follower of Sol Invictus, the sun god, and he promoted Christianity because it was a useful tool for controlling his empire. These aggressive and merciless doctrines, built on a foundation of pious fraud, laid the groundwork for 1,000 years of persecution and horrors. This is the power of a fabricated narrative. So there you have it, fellow truth seekers. The Jesus fallacy isn't just about whether a man named Jesus walked the earth, but about understanding that the Jesus of the Gospels is a construct. It's a character built from a mishmash of ideas, borrowed, adapted, and sometimes fabricated from millennia of human thought, from Canaanite deities and Persian dualism to Greek philosophy and Gnostic mysticism. My friends, the lesson here isn't to mock belief. It's to demand evidence, rationality, and personal responsibility. It's about empowering you to think critically and to understand that blind faith, historically, has often been a tool for control and oppression. If this video opened your eyes, if it challenged your assumptions, then you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe to the Rational Farid for more deep dives into truth, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us keep exposing the fallacies and promoting rationality. Thank you for watching.